Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now let's begin. This story is from when I was a kid. It's not something I talk about often, mostly because it makes me feel uneasy whenever I think about it. It's hard to explain, just a deep, uncomfortable feeling inside. Maybe writing it down will help me get it out of my head somehow, but honestly, I'm not sure it will. I went to a boarding school far out in the suburbs. I started there in 8th grade and stayed through most of high school. I shared a dorm room with a kid named Weston. At first, we weren't close, just two strangers forced to share a space. But over time, we got used to each other. Our room was small, 2 beds, 2 desks, and a tiny closet we had to share. Nothing special. But after a few weeks, I started noticing some really strange things about Weston. The first thing was a list. One afternoon, he just walked up to me and handed me a folded piece of paper. No explanation, no warning. It looked like something official, but when I opened it, I realized it was a list of things I wasn't allowed to bring into the room. Totally random stuff, too. I don't remember everything that was on there, but I'll never forget 2 of them. One was frogs. I wasn't allowed to bring frogs into the room. As if that was ever something I planned to do. I had no clue where I'd even find a frog, let alone why I'd want one in our dorm. But the strangest thing was salt. Yeah, salt. He didn't want salt anywhere near the room. It made no sense. It's not like people carry salt around for fun, and food wasn't even allowed in our dorms. So why would he even bring that up? Salt isn't dangerous, and as far as I know, no one is allergic to it. But he was deadly serious about it. There was no trace of humor in his tone, no smirk, nothing, just cold, strict rules. He was weird in other ways too. He muttered to himself a lot, especially late at night. Not little hums or mumbles. He'd whisper full sentences under his breath like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. The first few times I heard it, I was terrified. It woke me up once, and I thought he was on the phone or talking in his sleep. But it wasn't that. It was like he was having a quiet conversation with an invisible person. Eventually I got used to it, or maybe I just pretended I did. He also had this small black notebook that he guarded like it was made of gold. He never let anyone near it. He always kept it under his mattress, and after a while, curiosity got the better of me. One day when he was gone, I reached under his bed and pulled it out. Most of the pages were blank, but a few had writing on them. When I flipped to one of those pages, I froze. It was a list of names, dozens of them. Many of them were scratched out. As I read through them, I started recognizing some of the names. They were students at our school. My stomach dropped when I found my own name near the bottom of one of the last pages. It wasn't crossed out, which I guessed was good, but I had no idea what the list meant. There were no notes, no explanations, just names. I put it back where I found it, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Why did he have that? Why were some names crossed off? If it were just some dumb list, why keep it hidden? And why protect it like his life depended on it? After that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew I'd looked at it. I became paranoid. Every time I caught him glancing at me, it felt different, like he was watching me, not just looking. I started avoiding the dorm, hanging out in my friends' rooms as much as I could. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about that list, about what might happen next. Then one night, my worst fears came true. I woke up in the middle of the night. The room was completely dark, pitch black except for the faint moonlight leaking through the window. At first, I thought Weston was whispering again, but then my eyes adjusted and my blood turned to ice. Weston wasn't in his bed. He was standing over mine, just standing there smiling. His face was twisted into this unnatural grin, and his hands were half raised, like he'd been about to do something but froze mid-motion. I screamed without even thinking. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt, but Weston didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just stood there, that same smile stretched across his face. When I finally managed to ask what he was doing, he simply said I'd been talking in my sleep. That was it. Like that explained everything. Like it was normal to stand over someone in the dark at 2 in the morning. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning I tried bringing it up. I thought maybe daylight would make it less weird. But when I asked him, he looked completely confused. Not angry, just confused, like he genuinely didn't know what I was talking about. He even gave a small laugh and said, I must have been dreaming. I didn't know which was scarier, the idea that he was lying or that he truly didn't remember. After that night, I didn't just fear him, I feared the room itself. It felt wrong somehow, like his presence had infected the place. Even when he wasn't there, the air felt heavy and cold. Then about a week later, something happened that made me want to run away for good. I came back to the dorm late one evening and saw something moving on my bed. When I looked closer, I realized it was a small snake. A live garden snake coiled up right on my pillow. I screamed and jumped back. Weston just sat there at his desk, staring at me with that blank expression. He apologized, said it was a harmless prank. But when I asked him where he'd even found the snake, he looked at me like I was crazy and said, "What do you mean? They're everywhere." That line still haunts me. I had never seen a single snake on campus. Not one. But what scared me most was what happened next. He picked up a glass jar from his desk, opened it, and the snake slithered into it all by itself. It didn't struggle or try to escape. It just slid inside, quiet and obedient, like it had done it before. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I should have told a teacher, but I didn't. I was only 13. I didn't know what to do. I was too scared of what Weston might do if I got him in trouble. The final straw came a few nights later. I thought I was dreaming at first. I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, I guess. But I could see everything. The room was dark, and there was this shadowy mass swirling above me. It looked like thick smoke or a black cloud, but it moved like it was alive, breathing, pulsing, shifting across the ceiling. Then a shape started forming inside it. A claw, or something like a claw, reached out and began scratching my bed frame. The sound of it made my chest tighten. It started stretching toward me inch by inch. I couldn't scream or move, just stare. But then it suddenly pulled back, like something had burned it. That's when it went wild. The dark mass started thrashing across the room, spinning fast and knocking things over. It slammed into our desks, tore open the closet, and then shot straight toward the window, shattering it into 100 pieces before disappearing into the night. The crash snapped me out of my paralysis, and my eyes opened wide. I realized my neck was already turned toward the window, like I'd been facing it the whole time. My breath caught in my throat when I saw it. The window was really shattered, not just in my dream, in real life. Tiny shards of glass were still falling onto the floor, catching the moonlight as they dropped. And the room looked exactly like it had in my nightmare. Every detail was the same. It was a perfect match. Even though I was sure I was awake, I still couldn't move a single muscle. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. I forced my eyes away from the broken window and saw something that made my stomach twist. There were deep, ugly scratches carved into the wooden frame of my bed, right where that claw in my dream had been scraping. The fear didn't fade, but the paralysis slowly lifted, and as soon as I could move again, my first thought was that Weston had done it somehow. It had to be him. I stumbled to his bed and saw him lying there fast asleep, his breathing slow and steady. He was even snoring softly, but I didn't believe it. I was sure he was faking. I started shaking him, whispering his name at first, then shouting, desperate to make him react. But he didn't move an inch. The longer he stayed still, the more my stomach turned. I wanted him to wake up. I wanted proof that it was him, that there was a normal reason for all of this. But he just kept sleeping, his face peaceful, his body limp, as if nothing in the world had happened. That moment broke something inside me. I was terrified of him, but I was even more terrified of what it would mean if it hadn't been him. If that thing I saw hadn't been a dream. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. I wanted so badly to blame Weston, to have someone to point at and say, "It's your fault," because the other option, that something else had been in that room with me, was too much to handle. But he wouldn't wake up. No matter how much I shook him, he just lay there. I finally gave up, backed away, and curled up on my bed like a child. I cried quietly, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But it was. The window was shattered. The room was a mess. The scratches on my bed were real. Everything was real. A few minutes later, Weston finally woke up. He rubbed his eyes and looked around the room like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. For a second, I thought maybe we could talk about it, that maybe we were in this together. But instead, he turned to me with this wild look and accused me of going through his things. My fear turned into anger. I started yelling back, telling him he was insane. Then he did something that froze me to the core. He started hissing at me like an animal, sharp and low, his teeth bared. And then, out of nowhere, he started shouting in a language I'd never heard before. It didn't sound like any language I knew. It was harsh, fast, and full of sounds that didn't even seem human. I was so scared I couldn't even move. He looked like he was about to attack me. Everything after that became a blur. I remember the door suddenly bursting open and our resident advisor standing there. He must have heard us screaming. He pulled us both out of the room, his face pale and confused, and I didn't say a word. I just wanted to get away from Weston. That night, they let me sleep in an empty room down the hall. I remember curling up on the bed, exhausted but too scared to close my eyes. When I finally did drift off, it didn't last long. I woke up freezing cold. My whole body was shaking. I sat up and realized why. The window in that room was wide open. I knew for a fact I'd closed it before falling asleep. The wind was blowing the curtains inward, making the shadows on the wall move like they were alive. That was when I knew something was seriously wrong. It wasn't just Weston. It wasn't just a nightmare. Something else was happening. By morning, I was still in shock. One of the RAs came to check on me and told me to grab my things from my old room. When I got there, all of Weston's stuff was gone. His bed was empty. His drawers were cleared out. It looked like he had vanished overnight. Nobody told me what had happened or where he went. They just said I'd be moving into another dorm with a new roommate and that Weston was no longer my concern. That's all they said. I never saw him again. The rest of my time at that school is a blur. I can barely remember the classes, the people, even the campus itself. It's like my brain sealed it off, locking away everything connected to that night. Maybe it was trying to protect me. I don't know. I've tried to figure it out so many times to make sense of it all, but nothing fits. The window had been broken from the inside. I checked it myself. If something had smashed it from outside, there would have been debris or marks, but there was nothing. And as much as I want to believe Weston was behind it, I can't convince myself. He was in a deep sleep when I woke up, and I had opened my eyes only seconds after the sound of breaking glass. I would have seen him moving if it had been him. There's no logical way to explain it. Something unnatural happened that night. Something I wasn't supposed to see. And the worst part, the part that still haunts me, is knowing that whatever it was, it didn't come from outside. It came from inside that room. Inside the darkness above my bed. And sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can still hear the faint sound of scratching wood. Like that same claw, dragging itself closer. Maybe that's why I don't talk about it. Because deep down, I still wonder if my nightmare wasn't a nightmare at all. Story 2. When I was a kid, my parents used to send me to my grandparents' farm in Pennsylvania every summer for 2 weeks. Their property was about 40 acres, but most of it was woods, not farmland. It always felt like the trees went on forever. My cousin Francisco would go there too, but our parents made sure our visits didn't overlap, so our grandparents could get a break. I always went the first 2 weeks of July, and he always went the last 2 weeks of August. The house had 3 floors, but the top floor was really just an attic with one finished room that used to belong to my dad when he was a kid. That's where I slept. The ceiling slanted down on both sides, and there was one small window that looked out over the backyard and the dark stretch of woods behind it. My grandparents went to bed early, usually before 9, and my parents had told me it was rude to stay up later than them. So after they said goodnight, I stayed in my room. I wouldn't sleep right away. I'd use my flashlight to read books or play my Game Boy since there wasn't much else to do there. The first summer passed quietly, nothing weird at all. But when I came back the next year, strange things started happening. One of the first nights I was lying in bed reading, when I heard soft footsteps on the attic stairs. They sounded careful, like someone didn't want to be heard. I froze when the door handle began to turn, and the door creaked open about 6 inches. I panicked and turned off my flashlight, pretending to be asleep. I thought it was my grandma coming to check on me and didn't want her to catch me awake. But I never heard anything else. No footsteps leaving, no sound of the door closing. I eventually fell asleep, telling myself maybe I just missed her leaving, or maybe she was still standing there watching me. The next morning, I told my grandpa about it. He just said the house was old and made noises, and that sometimes raccoons got into the walls. I wanted to tell him I'd seen the handle turn and that raccoons didn't open doors, but I kept quiet. His voice sounded certain, so I dropped it, thinking maybe it really had been my grandma. A few nights later, I woke up, or thought I did, because my bed was shaking slightly. Someone was standing at the end of it. I couldn't see clearly in the dark, but there was definitely a figure there. I couldn't tell if it was my grandpa or grandma, but either way, it scared me so much I froze. I squeezed my eyes shut and counted silently to 100. When I opened them, the person was gone. I told myself it must have been a dream, but it didn't feel like one. In the morning, I saw my closet door open, even though I was sure it had been closed before I went to sleep. That made me doubt myself even more. Maybe my grandma really was coming into my room at night. The thought creeped me out, but I didn't want to accuse her or make her feel bad, so I said nothing. Things like that kept happening over the next week. Sometimes it was footsteps, sometimes the sound of my door creaking open, or the sense that someone was standing nearby while I pretended to sleep. When it was finally time to go home, I felt more relief than sadness. When my mom came to get me, I told her about everything. She laughed and said it couldn't have been my grandma because once she was asleep, she barely moved at all. My mom said I had a wild imagination and that old houses made strange sounds all the time. She even said Francisco never complained about anything weird when he stayed there, which made me feel foolish, like maybe I really had imagined it all. But the next summer, when I went back again, the same things happened. Every few nights I'd hear the stairs creak, see my door move, or feel someone standing too close in the dark. I never saw a face, but I was sure it was my grandma. I started going to sleep early, hoping I could avoid being awake when it happened. As the years went by, I got older, and eventually my parents stopped sending me there. Part of me was honestly thankful for that. The farm might have been peaceful during the day, but at night it always made me uneasy. Years later, when I was in college, both my grandparents passed away within weeks of each other. The funeral was incredibly sad, not just because they were gone, but because I had to see so many relatives I barely knew anymore. One of them was Francisco. Even though we were close in age, we had never really bonded. Still, we ended up talking for a bit. I didn't know what else to say, so I brought up the summers at the farm. It felt like a safe topic, something we both knew. I told him about the footsteps, the figure, and the open closet door. I even mentioned how I thought it was Grandma. I expected him to laugh or maybe roll his eyes, but instead his face went completely blank. He looked at me and said, in the calmest voice, "That's nothing." That thing used to touch me. I felt cold all over. I stared at him, waiting for him to say he was joking, but he didn't. He told me that every few nights, the same shadowy figure would appear at the end of his bed too. Only unlike me, it didn't just watch him. He said he'd feel the bed sink down like something had sat on it. Then fingers would trace along his face, slowly, like they were memorizing his features. Sometimes it would grab his wrist and hold it. He said he always kept his eyes shut and stayed completely still until it went away. I asked him how he knew it wasn't one of our grandparents, and he said, almost like it should have been obvious, that whatever it was had rough, scratchy hands. Nothing like Grandma or Grandpa's. I just sat there staring at him, horrified. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why hadn't he ever told anyone before? He said he had told his mom a few times, but she never believed him. She'd even gotten angry and told him to stop making up stories. So he stopped talking about it and just told himself that as long as he stayed still and didn't open his eyes, it would eventually go away. Hearing him say that made my stomach twist. It meant everything I had seen and felt wasn't my imagination after all. It was real, and worse than I'd thought. After that, neither of us wanted to talk about it anymore. It felt like a dark secret we both carried, something we didn't want to remember. But I still think about it sometimes. If it wasn't my grandma standing in my doorway or touching Francisco's face, then what was it? The way he called it a thing still chills me. Because if it wasn't something supernatural, then the other option is even worse. That there was a person, a stranger, secretly living in my grandparents' house for years without anyone knowing. And honestly, I don't know which is more terrifying. Story 3. When I was 9 years old, I lived with my parents in a narrow townhouse that sat tightly between two identical ones. My bedroom was on the 3rd floor, and its window looked directly into the house behind ours. The houses were so close that I could see right into the room across from mine, maybe 20 feet away. For a long time, that window was always empty, but I often looked through it just to see if anyone was there. Then one day, there was. It was a girl. She looked about my age with dark hair tied back in a ponytail, and she wore a yellow sweater. She waved at me, and I waved back. Then she stepped away from the window. After that, we waved to each other every day when I came home from school. She was always there at exactly 3:30, as if she had been waiting. And every single time, she wore that same yellow sweater. We made a little routine out of it. Sometimes she would hold up drawings and I would try to guess what they were. I'd show her my homework and she'd give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. On warm days, I'd open my window and try to talk to her, but she never opened hers. She'd just smile and point to her ear, like she couldn't hear me through the glass. I thought maybe her parents didn't allow her to open the window. One day I asked my mom about the girl. My mom said the Murphys lived in that house, an older couple with no kids. When I told her about the girl, she said maybe it was their granddaughter visiting. That made me a little sad, thinking the girl would leave soon. But she didn't. She was there almost every single day, always around the same time, and we'd play our little games for about half an hour before she disappeared from view. A few weeks later, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of tapping. I looked over and saw her standing at her window. It was strange because I had never seen her at night before. She wasn't smiling like usual. Instead, she pointed down at something I couldn't see and put her hands together like she was begging. I didn't understand what she wanted, and it scared me, so I crawled back into bed and pulled the blanket up. The tapping went on for a few more minutes and then stopped. She wasn't at her window for the next 3 days, and I started to feel bad, thinking I had upset her by ignoring her. But then, on the 4th night, the tapping came again. I got up and saw her standing there, pressing both hands against the glass. Her mouth was moving like she was trying to say something, but I couldn't hear her because the window was still shut. I noticed her breath fogging up the glass, which didn't make sense. It was the middle of May and warm outside. I squinted, trying to read her lips. It looked like she was saying, "Help me." Then she stepped back, and that's when I noticed it. There was a dark stain on her yellow sweater, like a smudge of mud or maybe something worse. I froze, my heart pounding, and ran straight to my parents' room. My dad came back with me and looked out my window, but the light was off across the way, and the girl was gone. They told me it was just a nightmare and sent me back to bed. The next day, when she didn't show up, I climbed our back fence and saw Mrs. Murphy tending her garden. I waved and she smiled at me warmly, though we'd never really talked before. I asked her about the girl in the 3rd floor room. The second I mentioned it, her smile faded. She slowly set down her watering can and came closer to the fence. Her voice was quiet when she asked how long I'd been seeing this girl. I told her a few weeks and described her dark hair, ponytail, and yellow sweater. Then I told her how she never opened her window. Mrs. Murphy's face went pale. She told me to go back inside immediately. I thought I'd done something wrong. That night, my parents moved my bed to the opposite wall and hung thick, heavy curtains that blocked all the light. When I asked why, they said it was to help me sleep better. But I knew that wasn't true. Something was wrong. The next day on our way home from school, my mom told me I couldn't wave at the girl anymore. When I asked why, she said I was too old for imaginary friends. I tried to tell her the girl wasn't imaginary, that I had seen her for months, but she just repeated that I couldn't go to the window again. I felt so confused and sad. It was like no one believed me. My friend had vanished, and everyone acted like it was my fault. I wanted to see her again, but I didn't dare disobey my parents after that. She never appeared in the window again. Things just went back to normal, except for the thick curtains that stayed closed all the time. About a year later, we moved away. Years passed, and I didn't think much about it until I was in high school. One day, my mom finally told me the truth about what Mrs. Murphy had said. She told me that the people who lived in that house before the Murphys had a daughter named Jenna. She was 11 when she was hit by a car right in front of the house, just after school, while wearing a yellow sweater. She died that day. The family moved out soon after, and when the Murphys bought the house, they tried to use the third-floor room, but ended up sealing it off because strange things kept happening there. My mom didn't say what kind of things, just that Mrs. Murphy had always been very spiritual. I'm 34 now, and I live in a house where no window faces another building. That's not an accident. I can't stand seeing another window looking back at me. I even avoid mirrors and glass surfaces when I can. Every now and then, I still dream about that girl in the yellow sweater. In the dreams, she doesn't have the stain on her clothes, and she isn't frightening. She just stands there watching me through the glass. She never smiles anymore, but she doesn't look angry either, just sad. It's one of those things that never leaves you, one of those eerie, unexplainable memories that live somewhere deep in your mind, waiting for the night to fall before they come back to remind you that maybe it wasn't all in your imagination after all.